I wasn't supposed to be on that boat. It was a last-minute decision. A friend cancelled, leaving a free spot for me on this overnight journey across the bay. The idea was simple. A group of us would sail out to an isolated island, spend the night camping under the stars, and return by morning. The promise of adventure tempted me, even though I wasn't particularly fond of open water. When I arrived at the small harbor, the boat immediately caught my eye. It wasn't the sleek modern kind you'd expect for a tourist trip. Instead, it was old, with chipped paint and a faint creaking sound every time it rocked against the pier. Its name, the Silent Tide, was scrawled on the side in faded peeling letters. There were 6 of us, including the captain. He was a wiry man in his 50s with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to hold too many secrets. "She's an old beauty, but she'll get you there," he said with a crooked grin as we stepped aboard. His confidence didn't reassure me, but I laughed along with the others, pretending not to notice the uneasy feeling in my chest. The rest of the group seemed excited, almost too excited. There was Jenna, a self-proclaimed adventurer who kept snapping pictures of everything, even the seagulls circling above us. Her boyfriend, Mark, was the loudest of the bunch, cracking jokes and guzzling down beers he'd smuggled aboard. Then there was Lisa, quiet and reserved, who kept looking at the water, like she was searching for something beneath the surface. Rounding out the group was Alex, the trip organizer, whose enthusiasm was contagious. As we pushed off from the dock, the town lights grew smaller and smaller behind us. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the water shimmered in the fading sunlight. I tried to relax, letting the cool breeze wash over me, but something felt off. The first sign was the smell. It hit me about 20 minutes into the journey. A faint, sour odor that I couldn't place. At first, I thought it was just the salt water or the damp wood of the boat, but it grew stronger the further we went. No one else seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't say anything. I kept my thoughts to myself, not wanting to come across as paranoid. Then there was the engine. It sputtered every now and then, a sharp stutter that made my stomach tighten. Each time it happened, the captain would glance down at the controls, muttering under his breath before continuing as if nothing was wrong. "It's just temperamental," he said when Mark asked about it. "Nothing to worry about." But I was worried. The sun dipped below the horizon, and darkness crept in faster than I expected. The stars began to emerge, dotting the sky like tiny pinpricks of light. It should have been beautiful, but the vastness of the open water felt suffocating. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional laughter from the others. And then I saw it. A shadow in the water, just out of the corner of my eye. It was quick, too quick for me to make out any details, but it was there. I turned my head sharply, scanning the surface, but there was nothing. Just the gentle ripples trailing behind the boat. "Everything okay?" Lisa's voice startled me. She was standing closer than I realized, her hands gripping the railing. "Yeah, I just thought I saw something," I said, my words trailing off. She gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You'll see a lot of things out here if you're not used to it. Your mind plays tricks on you." I nodded, but her words didn't comfort me. If anything, they made me more uneasy. The night grew colder, and the laughter on board began to fade. Mark and Jenna huddled together on one side of the boat, while Alex busied himself checking supplies for the camp. Lisa stayed by the railing, staring into the water like she was waiting for something to rise from the depths. The captain's radio crackled to life, a burst of static followed by a faint, garbled voice. He picked it up, his expression shifting from relaxed to tense in an instant. "What's wrong?" Alex asked, noticing the change in his demeanor. "Nothing," the captain said quickly, but his eyes betrayed him. He adjusted the radio and turned it off. "Just interference. Happens sometimes this far out." I didn't believe him, and as I looked back at the water, at the endless dark expanse stretching out in every direction, I realized something. We were alone. Completely, utterly alone. Or at least, we were supposed to be. It must have been an hour since we left the harbor, but it felt longer. The night had fully settled in now, draping the world in an unsettling darkness. The only light came from the boat's small overhead bulbs, flickering occasionally as if unsure whether they wanted to stay on. The sound of the engine had become a kind of background hum, steady but grating, like it was fighting against the water. I kept catching myself glancing at Lisa. She hadn't moved from her spot by the railing. She was still staring out into the water, her body rigid, her hands gripping the metal as if she might fall overboard at any moment. I wanted to ask her if she was okay, but something about her posture made me hesitate. Then the engine sputtered again. But this time, it didn't recover. The boat lurched, and the sound of the motor stalling left a deafening silence in its wake. Mark cursed loudly, nearly spilling the beer in his hand, while Jenna grabbed his arm for balance. Alex rushed over to the captain, who was frantically flipping switches and turning knobs on the control panel. "What's going on?" Alex demanded. "It's nothing," the captain muttered, though his tone suggested it was definitely something. "Just a minor issue. I'll have it fixed in no time." The rest of us exchanged uneasy glances. The boat drifted aimlessly, rocking gently with the waves. For a moment, the silence felt almost peaceful. But then I heard it. A sound. It was faint at first, barely audible over the lapping of the water against the hull. But it was there, a low rhythmic thudding, like something heavy, hitting the side of the boat. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Jenna replied, though she sounded distracted, her eyes darting nervously around. The thudding grew louder, more insistent. I moved closer to the edge of the boat, peering down into the water. It was too dark to see anything, but the sound was unmistakable now, echoing through the quiet night. "It's probably debris," the captain called out, not looking up from the controls. "Happens all the time." But it didn't sound like debris. It sounded deliberate. "Maybe we should check it out," Alex suggested, though his voice wavered. "Stay on board," the captain snapped more forcefully than necessary. "It's nothing. Let me handle it." As if to emphasize his point, he grabbed a flashlight and leaned over the edge of the boat, shining the beam into the water. The light danced across the surface, illuminating nothing but ripples and shadows. And then the thudding stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Too still. The silence was shattered by a sudden splash, loud and violent, as if something massive had just broken the surface. Jenna screamed, and I felt my heart leap into my throat as I stumbled back from the edge. "What the hell was that?" Mark shouted, his bravado gone in an instant. No one answered. The captain straightened up, his face pale. "It's just a fish," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "A big one maybe, but just a fish." A fish? Lisa finally spoke, her voice cold and flat. That wasn't a fish. We all turned to look at her. She was still standing by the railing, her gaze fixed on the water. What do you mean? Alex asked cautiously. Lisa didn't answer right away. When she finally turned to face us, her expression sent a chill down my spine. She looked haunted. There's something in the water, she said. I've seen it. What are you talking about? Jenna asked, her voice trembling. Lisa hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. Before we left, I heard stories about this part of the bay. Fishermen disappearing. Boats found adrift with no one on board. They said something lives out here. Something that doesn't like being disturbed. That's just local superstition, the captain said quickly, though he avoided meeting her eyes. Is it? Lisa shot back. Then why did you turn off the radio? The tension on the boat was suffocating. The captain didn't respond, his jaw tightening as he returned his focus to the controls. Before anyone could say anything else, the boat lurched violently to one side. We all stumbled, grabbing onto whatever we could to keep from falling. Was that a wave? Alex asked, his voice shaky. No, Lisa whispered. It wasn't. The boat rocked again, harder this time, as if something was pushing it from beneath. The flashlight the captain had been holding slipped from his grasp, tumbling into the water with a faint splash. And then we heard it. A sound that defied explanation. It was a low guttural noise, almost like a growl, but deeper and more resonant. It seemed to come from all around us, echoing off the water and vibrating through the hull of the boat. What the hell is that? Jenna screamed, clinging to Mark. No one answered. No one could. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin as I backed away from the edge, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. And then I saw it. A shape. It was barely visible in the water, just a darker shadow against the already inky blackness. But it was huge, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through me. It's circling us, Lisa said, her voice barely audible. What is? Alex asked, though I could tell he didn't really want to know the answer. Lisa didn't respond. She didn't have to. Because at that moment, the boat lurched again, harder than before, and the shadow disappeared beneath the surface, but I knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting. The night swallowed us whole. The faint glow of the stars was the only light we had, aside from the dim lantern hanging near the captain's console. It swayed gently with the boat's movement, casting flickering shadows on the deck. The smell I'd noticed earlier was stronger now, sour and metallic, like something rotting beneath the surface. I tried to focus on the sound of the waves, hoping it would calm me. But even the water sounded wrong, thick and sluggish, as though it was alive. That's when Jenna screamed. We all rushed to her side. She was clutching Mark's arm, her face pale, and her camera hanging loosely from her neck. I saw something under the water, she stammered. Mark laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. It's probably just a fish, babe. Relax. No, she insisted, her voice rising. It wasn't a fish, it was yours. Bigger, and it was watching me. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I glanced at Lisa, who stood a few feet away, staring silently at the water. She didn't seem surprised. All right, everyone settle down, the captain said, his voice gruff. We've got a few hours left before we reach the island. Stay calm and keep your head straight. But calm was the last thing I felt. As we returned to our spots, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every so often, I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye. Ripples in the water that didn't match the boat's rhythm. Shadows that darted too quickly to be natural. And then the engine sputtered again. This time, it didn't recover. The boat lurched as the engine cut out completely, leaving us adrift in the middle of the dark expanse. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft lap of water against the hull. "What's going on?" Alex asked, his voice tight with panic. The captain didn't answer right away. He was hunched over the controls, fiddling with switches and muttering under his breath. Finally, he looked up, his face grim. "It's dead," he said. "We'll need to radio for help." He grabbed the radio, but when he turned it on, all we heard was static. He twisted the dial, searching for a frequency, but the static didn't waver. Then faintly, beneath the crackle, came a voice. It was soft, almost melodic, but the words were unintelligible, like someone speaking from underwater. "Who's there?" the captain barked into the radio. The voice stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. We all stared at each other, the air heavy with the unease. "Maybe it's interference," Alex offered weakly, but no one believed him. The lantern flickered, its light dimming. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me, like the boat had tilted slightly, though it hadn't moved. That's when I noticed it. The temperature had dropped. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Lisa finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We shouldn't have come here." "What are you talking about?" Mark snapped. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the water. "This place, it's not just a bay. My grandmother used to tell stories about it. She said the water here is cursed. Boats vanish. People vanish." "Great," Mark muttered, rolling his eyes. "Just what we need. A ghost story." But Lisa's expression didn't change. "It's not a story," she said firmly. "They say there's something beneath the water, something that watches. And if it chooses you..." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Before anyone could respond, the boat shuddered violently, throwing us off balance. Jenna screamed again, clutching Mark as the boat tilted sharply to one side. "What the hell was that?" Alex shouted. The captain grabbed a flashlight and pointed it at the water. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but rippling waves. But as the light moved, I saw it, a massive shadow beneath the surface circling the boat. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't even an animal. The shape was too large, too unnatural. It moved with a deliberate slowness, like it was studying us, deciding what to do next. "We need to get off this boat," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "And go where?" Mark snapped. "We're in the middle of nowhere." Before anyone could argue, the shadow disappeared, and the boat stilled. For a moment, everything was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Then came the sound. It started as a low hum, barely audible, but it grew louder, resonating through the boat like a deep guttural moan. The lantern flickered again, and this time it went out completely, plunging us into darkness. Something slammed against the side of the boat, hard enough to make the wood creak. "We need to move," the captain yelled, grabbing flares from a nearby box. He lit one, casting an eerie red glow over the deck. The light flickered across our terrified faces as he fired the flare into the sky. It illuminated the water for a brief moment, and what I saw will haunt me forever. The shadow had risen, breaking the surface. It wasn't just one shadow. It was many, twisting and writhing together, forming shapes that were almost human, but not quite. Faces emerged, pale and distorted, their hollow eyes staring up at us. The hum grew louder, transforming into a chorus of voices, each one overlapping the next. They weren't speaking. They were crying. Lisa backed away, her hands trembling. "It's them," she whispered. "The ones who never made it back."